Welcome. Welcome to International Education Week. Welcome to Morgan State University. This week is International Education Week, November 16th through 20th. And in the United States, this is a national initiative to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange program worldwide, including schools, colleges, universities, embassies, and international organizations. I ask my guest here to use the chat room to introduce themselves and to post related information for networking and collaboration. In the room, we have a large percentage of faculty members and some student and also some academic administrators. Thank you and welcome. Because of the pandemic, this year was very different or is very different, yet you can count the number of virtual workshops and seminar or conferences you attended or presented since February or March of this year. Perhaps the number is at least 10 times higher than the number of events that you attended back in 2018 or 2019. Even in my case, the last 7 months, I attended more than 200 virtual sessions, including conferences, and also interacted about, I would say, 3,000 people across the globe as a speaker, host, and collaborators for various projects, including journals and the books. In the context of 1.3 million lives lost because of the pandemic, we live in a sad, depressed, and chaotic era of our life. Yet, digitally, we are connected to each other more than ever to get updated information about health, safety, well-being, and positivity for seeking a better path for our well-being and prosperous living. My name is Krishna Bista, Associate Professor of Higher Education at Morgan State University. And across the nation, yes, we are celebrating International Education Week. And thank you for joining us this morning. This is one of the sessions in the series of international program at Morgan. And we are so fortunate to have at least 9 speakers this morning who accepted our invitation to speak with us and share their current research. And I will introduce all of you in a minute. And this session will highlight the current issues and challenges in current mobility and consider how school and universities and colleges can reimagine their initiative and program to catch up international education and internationalization. And to start with, I am looking for my Assistant Vice President, Dr. Esteke. I think he's on the way, or if you are here in the room, please let me know. Yes, he is here. Dr. Esteke, would you unmute yourself? And so I would like to invite Dr. Jakob Esteke, Assistant Vice President of International Affairs at Morgan State University, for his brief opening remarks. Dr. Esteke?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. For some reason, my camera is not on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Let me just bring, I've written a few notes. So hello, everyone. For me, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with everybody. On behalf of President David Wilson and our Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Licia Crampton-Young, I want to send a warm Morgan welcome to all our guests and presenters who are joining us today from the US, but also from around the world. As we launch this year's International Education Week, we realize that the world has changed as we know it since March 2020. The world now is trying to adapt to the current conditions and trying to find the right work-life balance during the time of a pandemic, where the space between work and personal life has been mixed. The question to educators like us around the world is, how do we adapt to the current reality and come up with ideas that are, and here I'm quoting our provost, ideas that are innovative, transformative, and disruptive. And the title of today's symposium reflects that reality: Reimagining Study Abroad and Student Mobility. I hope the presenters use their own experiences to shed a light on how we need to reimagine study abroad and also campus internationalization for the future, because we all have to admit that the world we knew prior to the pandemic has changed forever. And one final note to all our guests is that this is the first session and we have several other sessions around, throughout the week. And I hope that the students especially get the chance to attend all these sessions, because there are so many things they can learn from attending these amazing sessions. In conclusion, I want to officially launch the start of International Education Week at Morgan State University for the year 2020. And I'm sure that this presentation will be a great one. And Dr. Vista, Dr. Goli, and all the organizers, I really appreciate what you guys are doing for Morgan State and all international organizations. And I'm looking forward to attending all of the sessions. Thank you, Dr. Vista.
Thank you, Dr. Astiki. He's the fearless leader here at Morgan University, to start the branch campus at in Ghana, and doing several international activities across the globe. And we are in a great team, including President Wilson, Dr. Astiki, and many of the senior leaders of international education and higher education here. The United States is the #1 destination for international students, and currently over 5 million international students all over the world are pursuing their highest education. And today, both international students and their domestic peers are taking online and remote learning. If you look into the chart here, you can see international education is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Educators, university leaders, and policymakers are seriously reimagining the landscape of global student mobility and international education in general. Our institution of higher education cannot survive without international students. Look at the university around the world and the highest percentage of the students on campus, such as the University of Sharjah with the 82% international student, London School of Economics with the 70% international student on campus, and many American universities across the country, who host more than 10,000 international students, including University of Southern California, NYU, Boston University, Columbia University. They have a greater number of international students. Also note a growing number of foreign-born faculties, deans, and university presidents at the colleges and universities around the globe. Many of them are the former international student. As a former international student myself, I represent to one of the 200,000 foreign professors teaching in the United States. And look at the traffic. Look at the traffic in the U.S. alone. 1.09 million international students were enrolled American colleges last year, whereas 347 American students went to another country for a study abroad. And this number had changed slightly this year. The total number of international students studying at the U.S. colleges, they were decreased by 16% for this fall, and then overall enrollment by 43%. And IIE has released their annual data just today. So with this, I'd like to ask all of you, to type your response in the chat room. What do you reimagine? What do you reimagine studying abroad or student mobility in a virtual world? Using your chat room, I ask you to type one word or phrase that represent reimagining student mobility or study abroad. So let me type these questions in the chat room. So I'd like to hear your perspective. What do you think? What should be the reimagining study abroad or student mobility? Go ahead and use the chat room. See lots of response coming in, flexibility and adaptability, virtual, in-person. Yes, and this pandemic tells us exactly why we need international programs and internationalization. I see inequalities, flexible virtual possibilities, and we need our students who understand global phenomena. We need our students who can see the xenophobic reaction, inequalities, social injustice. Our students should prepare our students to work with the colleagues around the globe to address global crises like this pandemic, to expand our research and advancement of the knowledge. Please go ahead and continue using the chat room. I can see lots of great responses in. So with this, let me bring my distinguished panel with whom I enjoyed working a little over a year in a book project called Inequalities in Study Abroad and Student Mobility. The good news is the book is published just today. So in a few minutes, I will take you to at least 5 countries in real time, from US, Australia to Belgium to Turkey. And I ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves and take about 4 minutes on the topic they would like to share with us. So to begin with, Let's begin with Melissa. Over to you, Melissa. Unmute and go ahead.
All right.
And here's your chapter.
Yeah. So, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And thanks to everyone for tuning in, particularly those of you who are coming to us in the middle of the night. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research at North Carolina State University in the United States. But I am coming to you from the state of Georgia in the United States. One benefit of the virtual world is that that means I have a bit more flexibility about where I live. So I've been asked today to speak a bit about U.S. study abroad experiences, which may seem like a bit of an odd topic to be discussing in the middle of a pandemic when international mobility is significantly limited. However, in the field of international education, and I'll speak today especially to an audience of U.S. international educators and the people who research U.S. study abroad, I think what the pandemic has given us is the opportunity to reflect on our programs in a way that was difficult to do in the times before the pandemic when students were constantly coming and going from abroad. That movement really kept us really busy and kept our minds off of maybe some important issues in U.S. study abroad. To my mind, there are really three questions that I hope we're asking ourselves as a field right now. The first one is who participates in our study abroad programs, and our study abroad students reflective of our general campus population. If they're not, which is probably the case, what policies and practices can we implement to ensure greater access to education abroad opportunities for all students, but especially those who have been historically marginalized in our programs as we enter into the post-pandemic world? And recent work that I've conducted with Dr. Amy Stitch, who is an assistant professor at the University of Georgia, suggests that there are several things that we can do to increase access to study abroad opportunities. One is involving students' parents in the study abroad process. A second one is addressing specifically issues that historically underrepresented students might encounter while abroad. And one of the big ones there is issues around racism in the study abroad environment. A third thing that we can do is to provide students with ample information about international travel and what it entails. Providing this kind of information serves to level the playing field for students who can't, for example, ask a family member or rely on past experience about what international travel is like. And doing these things can go a long way to open access to education abroad. A second question that I really hope we're asking ourselves is what are students learning from education abroad programs? Are they learning what we want them to learn? And how can we transform our programs so that students get the most out of their experiences? And while quite a bit of research has focused on students' outcomes from studying abroad, this empirical work, to my mind, really lacks a robust statistical design. And I'll speak now particularly to quantitative researchers. Often studies don't involve a comparison group. So changes that we might see over time for study abroad students, for example, in things like global perspective taking, those changes might be due to study abroad, but it also might just be natural change that happens over time for all students. And even in research where a comparison group is used, I see that researchers often don't account for selection bias, meaning that study abroad participants are systematically different from non-participants even before they set foot on an airplane. In this case, we don't know if changes over the course of study abroad are due to actual experience or if it's due to these systematic differences that were already there before study abroad happened for those participants. And then the third question that I really hope we're asking ourselves is how do our programs impact other individuals involved in creating a successful study abroad program? And I'm specifically thinking about local communities that might be impacted when a study abroad program arrives to their geographic location. I am aware of very little work and none of it particularly empirical that addresses this question. I think it's an important question to ask in our future work. Our study abroad programs, if we've done our jobs correctly, impact outcomes for our students. And I've got just one more point and then I'll finish up. But we must keep in mind that our programs also impact other individuals in and around where these program activities are taking place. I'm particularly concerned that these impacts are negative, whether that's environmentally or economically. And that is particularly worrisome when host communities are Black and Brown, as study abroad then contributes to this additional racial stratification in the world. So thank you so much for having me again today, and I look forward to your questions and comments in the Q&A section.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. This is great. We'll certainly take the questions, and I ask our guests to use the chat room for the questions, and panelists also will be answering, responding some of your questions there. So with that, I'd like to invite my second guest, two great friends from all the way to Australia. Dan and Richard, over to you.
Firstly, Richard and I would like to thank Dr. Suzanne Commerce and Associate Professor Krishna Bista for the opportunity to contribute to their book. Our chapter focuses on 2 metropolitan universities in Australia. Richard and I are academics in the area of teacher education programs. We work at 2 different universities. We initially met and worked at the same institute, and Richard's and I at a different university. In our experience, we found that study abroad programs generally attract a small subset of elite and privileged students, and faculty members are often not all included. So it's not always inclusive for all students and staff. So in an effort to contribute to an equitable pathway to internationalization, we recognize the need and the importance for all students to have an equal opportunity of internationalizing the curriculum at home. So we took into consideration the diverse circumstances of our students' economic situations that they're from, because they're from varied backgrounds and etc. And we addressed a more inclusive nature of offering something at home. So the pay as you go, or pay, to go overseas and study abroad is not always inclusive for all students and staff. So we focused on the Bachelor of Education primary course, which we call the BEd Primary. I'm a music educator, so what I do in an effort to teach about multicultural music, I connect my students with academics and musicians or culture bearers locally and internationally through Skype or telephone conferencing, and also face-to-face workshops for those that live here in Australia. So these teachers and performers come from Australia, Africa, Malaysia, Spain, Sri Lanka, and New Zealand. I'm formerly from South Africa, so I also teach about African music to my students, but invite others to offer students a perspective about culture, history, heritage. And this gives my students an opportunity to engage with people away from locally, but to gain some intercultural and international perspectives on pedagogical approaches to teaching songs, instruments, etc. I'll hand over to Richard and he'll talk about his program with the eTutor.
Thanks, Dawn. Thank you for this 2 a.m. adventure. I can't believe it. Anyhow, folks, you have to remember that this project that I'm talking about, eTutor, was in the pre-pandemic era. So it was quite novel. We were talking about teaching online. Our students doing the Bachelor of Education were actually tutors teaching children. Well, it was basically teaching English, and the students were in Malaysia, Pakistan, India, and Nepal mainly. And this came after several experiences that I had of taking groups of students to do practicum in these countries. And I was never entirely happy with what was going on, really. I saw it as a little bit of a junket, 4 weeks in another country teaching, whereas this e-tutor experience was actually a really good cultural experience, a good exchange. And it happened for the large number of students who could not afford to travel overseas. So I thought it was really successful. And what they were doing, our students were doing, were reflecting on learning, but largely intercultural learning. Mm-hmm. And the other aspect of it that was very interesting was the whole process of setting up these partnerships. And that was quite, it was quite tedious at times, but the cultural knowledge that was exchanged was quite remarkable. So I think the process of setting that up was also quite fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's great, and again, appreciate for staying in the middle of the night to share your research with us, despite the challenges with the pandemics and other things. So without further ado, I'd like to go to the next presenter, Adinda. Over to you.
Good afternoon here from Europe. My name is Adinda van Gaalen, and I'm actually an international student myself, but I'm also working. I'm a PhD student at Ghent University in Belgium, but I also have a full-time job at Nuffic in the Netherlands. And so in the book, I have presented research for my PhD, and my PhD focuses on undesired effects of internationalization in higher education. I noticed in my work as a policy officer that there are a lot of aims that we have with internationalization, and they're all for good reasons, but that we sometimes do not really look at the undesired effects that we are causing while trying to achieve very good benefits. And so although these positive effects have been fairly well documented and identified in literature, the negative effects are sometimes still overlooked. And so what I've done, I've tried to map them in the literature, and I used the I tried to find a values framework that would be applicable to more or less universally, which is very difficult. So I used the United Nations values framework, the People, Planet, Prosperity framework, to do so. And the results suggest that internationalization of higher education includes a number of dilemmas. If you look at, for instance, the people value, you see that student mobility and internationalization may lead to unequal student opportunities. It may also lead to unequal relationships between higher education institutions. In addition, higher education institutions may become less diverse in the sense that they may become more alike in their aim to find partners to cooperate with. They may actually start to look a lot like other universities and thereby losing their own particular character. Also, internationalization may actually reinforce the oversimplified views of cultures. Seeing cultures as having very particular specifics rather than being a very complex system of aspects. When you look at the planet's consequences, it's very simple. It's mainly comes down to the carbon emissions that we are all causing by flying, which is why I like it that we are now together from all of these different continents online. It's great to be able to do that now, and I hope that we will continue to do so even after the pandemic. And then in terms of the prosperity, student mobility can lead to social and economic inequality, and degree mobility may even lead to brain drain and also to poor countries subsidizing the rich countries' education systems. And so obviously these are consequences that we would like to diminish, and I hope that a framework like this one could inspire higher education institutions to review their internationalization activities, but based on their own particular values framework. So it's not meant to be a universal framework, but rather as an inspiration. And this may help to develop an awareness of the consequences of internationalization beyond the own organization or the own country. And this may eventually lead to the development of ethical internationalization. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. I appreciate it. We'll take a question, certainly. Please go ahead and use the chat room. So now let me welcome next presenter, Manca and Bayan.
Good morning, everyone. Aloha from Hawaii. It is just going to be me this morning. It's 5:30 a.m. here. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be introducing the chapter on secondary school student mobility. The purpose of the study was to explore equity issues in secondary school student mobility. We conducted interviews with 20 alumni of 2 merit-based exchange programs sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, the Future Leaders Exchange, FLEX, and the Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study, or YES. These 2 programs bring exchange students to the U.S. to attend American high school and live with volunteer host family for an academic year. We drew upon Bourdieu's concepts of social and cultural capital to explore alumni's experiences pre, during, and after the exchange. Our sample included alumni who completed the exchange 2 to 15 years ago and came from various countries across Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. While students from lower socioeconomic status participate in these exchange programs, most FLEX and YES participants come from middle-class families. As per our study, parents played a significant role in supporting our participants during the application process as well as throughout the exchange. Cultural capital sometimes appears as social capital, with exchange students participating actively in host family and host community activities, thus extending their social network. With the newly acquired knowledge and skills, some alumni connected the immediate impact of exchange to their academic and career trajectories. Upon return home, alumni of Flex and Yes may be considered privileged compared to immobile peers in their home countries. Thus, mobility capital that is accumulated during the exchange can extend as a form of symbolic capital, which speaks to the equity issues of the merit-based scholarships. Half of our participants now reside in their home countries, while the other half currently work or study abroad. As such, we can see that even a short-term exchange and at an early age, so high school, may increase students' desire to engage in future international pursuits. However, in terms of long-term impact, we noticed that several older alumni challenged this idea, recognizing the importance of returning home to contribute to their home communities. On this note, it is commonly argued that study abroad leads to a brain drain phenomenon. We suggest that strategies should be deployed by program sponsors and local governments to sustain and to reap the benefits from social and cultural capital derived from the exchange in home communities. Finally, the study found that secondary school merit-based exchange programs such as Flex and Yes extend well beyond its education and culture exchange purposes. Our study also shows that short-term international student mobility might tap into further transmission of not only cultural and social capital, but also participant symbolic and mobility capital. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a great study. In fact, this is the one of the least area of the research, and we need more research in K-12 areas. Thank you. Thank you so much. So with that, let me bring my next guest all the way from Turkey now. Hatice, over to you. Unmute, please.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. And I should start this. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Vista and Dr. Commerce, for inviting me to this special and momentous event and letting me talk about my research study. I'm a lecturer. I'm working in Turkey at a public university now and teaching English. And I completed my PhD in the US as an international student. And I'm going to talk about part of my dissertation right now. I believe every writer, to some extent, writes about her life experience. So my research was actually about my own experience in the US as a graduate student, international graduate student. And I was surrounded by global elite students. So I felt the urge to study their language socialization processes, because I caught myself thinking oftentimes how these privileged elites impact their surroundings and how English language teaching and international education serve these people. To me, social class is an absolutely amazing concept. And somehow I believe that we can explain almost all the cases by the underpinnings of social class construct. So taking my cue from Bourdieu, I also consulted his 4 capitals, like my colleague. I tried to look into the experiences of some individuals, some elite individuals actually, whose elitist stands have lasted through repetition and routinization in their daily practices and in their discursive identity enactments in a global contact zone. So when we look closely at their narratives, which I compiled in 2 years, we could say 2 years time, or we could say that these individuals were in the group of historical class positionings. That is, they were in the group of two habituses. One of them happens to be normally Turkey, a less developed country which operates as an economic class society. And the other one is the US, an advanced multinational status conventional society where identity politics has constituted the main focus. So they had to balance this clash during their socialization in the US, yet oftentimes they avoided such confrontations and took their wealth as a refuge for their second language identity carvings. So the last point maybe I can dwell upon is how language learning as an agentive act reproduces or challenges the social structure was of particular interest in this study. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great, great, great topic and research. Thank you. So let me welcome next speaker. All right, Eva and Christopher, over to you. Eva.
Hi, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I was honored to contribute to the book with Christopher Johnston on comparing the theoretical conceptualizations in the US and in Europe. And so I would like to share some challenges that we uncovered and maybe some ideas of good practices. My name is Eva Janebova, and I have worked in international education for the last 15 years. But before that, I actually worked in inclusive education and social justice, and that's the lens that I have always had in international education too. So inclusive education in Europe has been on the agenda for some time, and I actually hope that it will be, because on Thursday the ministers are going to hopefully sign a communique in Europe on committing themselves to more inclusive higher education area in Europe and building it by 2030. So what are the challenges here in making internationalization more inclusive? On the European level, I think we are struggling with the individual countries having different disadvantaged populations, and it's very hard to find actually a broad, common, complex definition that would encompass everyone. As far as the national level, ministries and also institutions actually do not address inclusive internationalization in their strategies. There is about 14% of actually national ministries that look at inclusive education. On the institution level, we have uncovered that there is a really great lack of communication and collaboration between the different units. And because of the disconnection, the students have very hard time to actually find the information and navigate across the universities for the right information. We have also found out that on the individual level, there is great lack of motivation of students, which is actually very true, especially here in the Czech Republic, where students with special needs are afraid of spending more time and prolonging their studies when they go on mobility. As far as the good practices, there is a number of international and institutional projects. I will share some of them in the chat that are either researching, reporting, or developing new platforms among the universities and across Europe. There is new funding and hopefully more efficient funding for students in Erasmus. And there are new roles like inclusion officers that are going to, or are being set up to actually bridge the gaps between the units. There is a lot going on also with the Erasmus Student Network, which is sometimes sort of stepping in for the international offices. And just to have a little check note at the end here, the national agency is actually gathering a different organization into a steering committee so that we can progress with stakeholders in different organizations in drawing new guidelines for the Czech Republic, for all the institutions in higher education in the Czech Republic. So with that, I thank you for your time and also to Krishna and Suzanne for contributing to the book.
Thank you for your brief presentation. Appreciate it. I know we have many presenters, and I'm trying my best to keep brief so that we cover. And already, many of you have got the punishment, waking up in the middle of the night and presenting your research with us. So let me bring another speaker. This is very important one, considering the global pandemics. So let's hear from Sharon. Over to you, and Rita.
Good afternoon, morning, evening, middle of the night, day to everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Krishna, for inviting me to participate with this wonderful panel. I've been really enjoying hearing what everyone has to say. My name is Sharon Glazer. I'm a professor and chair of the Division of Applied Behavioral Sciences at the University of Baltimore. My background is cross-cultural, industrial, and organizational psychology. So my background is in psychology, not a teaching education background, but I believe psychology is supposed to be studying human behavior. And in my field, it's studying human behavior in the workplace. And unfortunately, we often forget the importance of culture and how it shapes who we are. And so I'm trying to bring that back into the classroom and into the experiences of students. Melissa earlier mentioned selection bias. One of the problems I think that we have in our world of studies for our students is that once the students graduate from their undergraduate studies, we think that they're capable of exploring the world on their own, and they are, but many don't have the opportunity. And so at the graduate level, as well as the undergraduate level, I developed a virtually abroad program, which brings an international experience to my students without having to leave. Once they are graduate students, but also undergraduate students, we know that travel isn't easy for many reasons. Either it's too expensive, fear of flying, mobility constraints, sight impairment, family responsibilities, work responsibilities, and so forth. So what we've done is brought a unique opportunity to expose students to international experiences through intercultural interactions. I've done it in 2-week programs, 4-week programs, and 10-week programs. I'll give you a brief overview of some of the things to consider as you develop this. You can have one or more partners, but you need to have at least one. And you need to start at least 12 months in advance in preparing, because time conception differs across cultures. And when my colleagues go on vacation, unlike the American colleagues, they really go on vacation. I'm theoretically on sabbatical right now, and I say theoretically because in the United States, you don't actually get to separate so much as we'd like to. We're not good at that in the United States. So here are some things to consider. First, make sure your student learning outcomes are clearly articulated with one another and aligned. So you may have some differing student learning outcomes, but you have to have some joint outcomes. So you need to figure out what course are you both teaching. It doesn't have to be the same course, but the activity has to yield similar ideas that the students will gain from the experience. Second, grading, marking schemes. Make sure you're aligned, because if your colleague or colleagues are grading on a different rubric than you are, then there will be chaos between the students, and some students may put more or less effort as a result. Think about the timing, the time zone differences, 2 a.m., 5 a.m. for various people on this call today. If you're coordinating with a partner that's 12 hours away or 13 hours away, you might have to think about doing something that is more virtual. You have to think about participation documentation. Your partner, colleague might need you to write a letter saying that you're participating with them. So you need time to get that from your dean or vice president. making sure that you're clear, both ends, on the selection criteria for the students. And I have 0 seconds left, I see. Think about your timeline very carefully. When are their vacations? When are your vacations? What does a weekend mean? Can you allow people to work on weekends? Think about your roles, who creates them, who provides information, who documents, who communicates to the students, how do you communicate? Think about your communication platforms, making sure you can share. For example, Teams doesn't really work across cultures because Teams is usually within the university environment and doesn't extend beyond in sharing files. How do you require students to communicate, their frequency? I'll just stop with the last piece. Well, it's not the last, but it's going to be now, is assessments. Make sure that you create well in advance an assessment of not only the program that you've created, but the students' growth and development. And think about, as someone was saying earlier, a matched sample of students who are not participating. So you know if there's true growth and as opposed to contrived growth. So I apologize, there are more ideas and tidbits. Go ahead and read that chapter that Rita and I wrote. It'll give you a lot of information, and I have lots of resources that I'm happy to share with you. Sorry for taking longer.
Thank you, Sharon. That's great. So before I introduce my next speaker, I'd like to ask you to think about the global leaders that we always remember, including Dr. Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, who are the pioneers, the history makers, and we always remember. But in the chat room, I also sent a name, Alicia Garza. How many of you know Alicia Garza? Probably very few of us know Alicia. Alicia is also a pioneer, and the leader we see nowadays are the leaders who are millions and hundreds behind them, but we sometimes do not know who do those special programs. So if you do not know Alicia is one of the pioneers of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we have such a special young activist that I'm going to introduce for the closing remarks, and after her remarks, we'll open for the discussion. So without further ado, let me introduce Alexandria Maloney. She's the president of the World is Watching Black Lives Matters, and also she's involved in many of the program and activities. Over to you, Alexandria.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Bista and Dr. Sake, for having me speak and share some brief remarks today with Morgan State alumni students, but also the global community that you all have built around Morgan State. I am a 2019 graduate of Morgan State University, my master's in international studies. My background is in foreign affairs and education policy. So this is very exciting to give back to the institution that gave so much to me. I'd like to share one brief resource that myself and a few colleagues have created recently. It's called A Black Girl's Guide to International Opportunities and Careers, but naturally it's open and available to all members of society who are interested in these opportunities. Let me see, I'm not able to share my screen, but in any case, if you are interested in receiving this information, Dr. Bista will have the link following this presentation. But now that I do have share access, excuse my screen. Again, it's a very organic product that has spread like wildfire, again, as a personal effort, but has reached, based on my confirmation, at least 500 or 600 members of the community that can add information and content to this document directly. So for folks who may be interested in international affairs but don't know where to start, we have those resources here. We have some great professional development resources and guides here. And then we have a contact and mentor section, various international affairs organizations that serve as a networking and connecting opportunity, as well as a number of fellowships, scholarships, and job opportunities that can come out of becoming a member of these various associations. And we have a few other, resource areas, conferences, fellowships, scholarships, and then we divide it up by career areas. So if this is something of interest to you, please do please do contact Dr. Bista. And then lastly, shamelessly, I have to put a plug in for my organization, which is Black Professionals in International Affairs, where we're a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., with the mission of connecting African Americans in this community across industry areas to different opportunities and connecting each other and connecting our community, but also connecting us to different events and other opportunities that come along with our membership base. So again, if you have any questions about any of these items, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Bista. And again, thank you for having me. I love coming back and speaking to communities that I've been a part of. One of those near and dear close to my heart is my beloved Morgan State University. So again, thank you for having me, and good luck to everyone in your endeavors with this research that's been proposed today.
Someone had asked about STEM. I think Stephanie had asked about giving experiences and access for people who are in STEM. And so it's very similar to the graduate students who don't often have opportunities to study abroad. So a virtually abroad experience is one that really gives students access, even if they're in STEM. So if you're even writing a report related to chemistry, you could have them still collaborate and work together. An important feature of infusing an experience for students, even abroad, is a social aspect. So having the students work together on an escape room, or what I'm doing next month is I'll have my students join a cooking class competition. You know, food is going to be an important part of bringing people together. So have them cook foods from different countries together through a cooking class competition. Have them do an escape room that you can do online now, as opposed to just having to be in person, to give that experience. And then talk about the different roles that people played in those escape rooms. And if you have those conversations about people's roles, then the students start to hear about different lenses. When someone was a leader and someone from another country will say, you weren't a leader, you were bossy, but that's not leadership. You start to have conversations about the kind of roles people take and the perspectives that people have from different countries on those roles. So having those types of experiences, social ones, infused within the academic studies is vital for the international experience. And you have to start those early in the program, and then try to invite them all throughout the program, having different ones like that, so they get more and more comfortable with one another and eventually stay in touch with each other, which many of my students have, and they've widened their networks as a result, their professional networks.
Thank you.
Now they're master students.
Thank you, appreciate it. Now, I would like to ask Suzanne, my best friend and the lead editor of the book, for her advice, for her experience working in the book projects, any other new updates she has. Over to you, Suzanne.
Well, hello everyone, and it's really wonderful to meet you all finally in real life. And not really, but to just see some faces with the names. It's really wonderful to hear about your research as well within even 4 minutes. It's a true accomplishment. I applaud you for that. And I would really like to thank you from the bottom of your heart for your wonderful contributions. You cannot imagine how exciting it was for me to start this book working with Krishna, and he gave me the freedom to choose a topic that I felt was relevant, and it became even more relevant today than it was 1.5 years ago when I came up with the topic of the book. But to see all the chapters that you wrote and the perspective that you took on the issue of inequality was really inspiring to me. And I hope for the many readers who read your chapters that they feel the same, that they feel inspired to make internationalization more equitable. And we have some work to do here, but I really truly believe that your perspectives and your work add to our collaborative efforts. So thank you so much, and I really hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you so much. I think it's still we're waiting for Alexandria, and earlier many of our colleagues did not get enough time. I understand. If you have a last minute advice or thoughts, please, this is the moment we can take advantage. Also, I'd like to add two updates. One, we are working on other couple of book projects. This time, instead of asking you to write 5,000 words or 6,000, we like to have a shorter chapters, probably 2,000 words or even a smaller, shorter, more the practitioner opinions as well as research in brief sort of, chapters. So I will be in touch with all of you in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Also, we are inviting many of our colleagues, including, all the guests to register for this event. As I said earlier, I think 75 or 80 guests were there. So each of you will receive an email about the upcoming, the special issue of the journal in other languages. We are particularly interested in French, Russian, and maybe German. We like to run a special edition in the Journal of International Student, more inclusive voice of faculty and students, former international student in those areas. So with that, now over to you guys. If you have a questions, turn on your microphone. Feel free to chime in any information. Yes.
Well, perhaps one thing that I would like to emphasize is that, well, obviously we're talking a lot about inequality and student mobility. And one thing that makes it a bit more complicated to solve this issue is that it's sometimes the solutions actually lead to other problems. So, for instance, if we manage to allow more students to go abroad or to help more students to go abroad, this will have consequences, for instance, for the carbon emissions, to name just one thing. So, and then there are other solutions and they may lead to other problems. So I don't want to make it impossible to find a solution for this. But this is at least something that I also found in my mapping, that it complicates finding a solution for the inequality aspect of student mobility.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your input. Any other colleagues want to contribute or add on? And there is another question from Kate in the chat room. Any of you feel free to answer her. Okay.
Oh, actually, there's a question for me, I see now.
Go ahead.
How do you help faculty and administrators understand the importance of the issues you raised? These issues require us to think about and work in new ways. Yeah, so what I do in practice is that, for instance, I inform our own board of NUFIC about what we can do as an organization to include these issues in our policies. And that will trickle down in the end to the higher education institutions in the Netherlands. But another thing that I was involved in was a summit on how to decrease the carbon footprint of internationalization in higher education, which was actually last week, was the CANI summit. And we showcased a lot of examples of how higher education institutions try to cut their carbon footprint. And so we try to share the knowledge that we find in higher education institutions and in literature.
Thank you. Thank you. And I guess the pandemic has also taught a big lesson for all of us, how to maximize the potential of technology. And many online programs such as COIL stands for Collaborative Online International Learning. Those kind of virtual program has been taking place across the globe, right? And many of them are redesigning their curriculum and rethinking about the possibility of connecting to the folks around the globe. So I think we'll have something new. It's hard to predict at this point. I think it unfolds as we move on and we adopt the new circumstances there. So I think it's a collective effort. As an educator, we invent as we move on. So let's take other questions or insight.
Hi. Krishna?
Yes, hi.
Mary. Okay, I'm from here from UAE, and I just want to ask, because this is my first time to attend the journal's virtual conference, and it's really lovely to meet everyone and nice to hear everybody's research on international students. I just want to ask clarification. When you talk about international students, do you refer to students going overseas, or do you also refer to students in transnational higher education? My research, actually I'm from RMIT, I finished my PhD from RMIT in Melbourne, and my research is actually on both transnational higher education and overseas students. So I just want to ask clarification on that. So anyone can perhaps answer
Sure.
that.
Sure. Right. We have a struggle with the definition. Every single country, define student mobility differently. US has probably the crazy list, with different names, different status based on their visas, their, types of program they are in. So here the general definition is those students who are outside their home countries, those who carry a different passport. And this definition does not hold true for, different countries. So it's an evolving definition. Originally the history goes with the foreign students, and the foreign student NAFSA is one of the oldest association in the US. NAFSA, they rename their names to the international educators. So this is evolving. There are lots of programs now with the branch campuses, dual degrees programs. So it's very hard to look into. So in the journals, we made a policy to define who are international students and how the definition is applied. Is it the state mandated definition, or this is the definition you are adopting from UNESCO or other organizations? So we liked the authors of the chapters, as well as any journal that you turn in, please go ahead and define this, because it has been changing. And you will hear from my panelists and other authors in the room regarding their experience. Thank you. Great question.
Krishna, I think we've got to be careful of not defining an international student by how they look, because often people will say, oh, you must be an international student. And in fact, they're not. So I think that whole idea of actually having an agreed definition is very important. And I heard the last person talking about RMIT. So I think at RMIT, we've got that the understanding that an international student is, as you described, someone who is not in their home country, who's studying out of their home country. But we had that confusion of people seeming to be looking like they're international, but actually they're not. They're Australian students. And I think we have to be very cautious of that. Can I make just one quick point, Krishna? That is, when we're talking about this communication, this pandemic era, the thing is that's brought up again is asynchronous and synchronous communication. And very often, while we are doing this synchronously, and that is we can hear each other speak live, there's a huge argument for asynchronous communication, and that is just writing up what you have to say and it being dealt with at another time. Now, what that allows, and Suzanne was making reference to this too, in different ways of communication. What that allows is for international students, especially those who haven't got the confidence to be articulate up in front of a whole group of people, that they can actually feel quite comfortable writing their thoughts and answering questions at a later time. And I think that's a very important part of the communication. Thanks, Krishna.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great point. When we consider inequality or stereotype leveling, now when we say Chinese international or Indian or another country, right, it does not sometimes define who they are. In a cosmopolitan world, now they have multiple identities, multiple experience from different cultures and countries. Yes, this is the task for educators to think about before we write or publish, and how we share the message. Right, this is the greater dimension. All right, we are almost top of the hour, and we appreciate for taking time to share your chapters, new research with us. We will be in touch. Thank you so much. if we have any last minute thoughts, closing, statement, anything, please go ahead. We can take one last statement.
I would really like to stay in touch with all of you. I will put my LinkedIn link in the chat for everyone to, this is an open invite to stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate all of you, and many thanks to my panelists and also my ABP, Dr. Jakobestaki, and all the colleagues at Morgan. And wish all the best for the International Education Week, and stay safe and healthy. We'll be in touch. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.